I walked through the side gate with a warm dish of peach cobbler balanced on my palm like a small sun. The string lights hummed against the early evening, and citronella candles hiccuped smoke that tasted like lemon and memory. Music too loud for my ears, something fast and joyful skipped over the grass. Laughter floated above the picnic tables, light as paper plates and just as disposable. I paused at the fence only because the latch stuck. It has always stuck. I lifted the wood, slid the catch and heard it, clear as a church bell. Why is she even still alive? The voice was smooth and quick, like a heel scuffing a floor. Then a soft ripple of laughter. Not a roar. Just enough to split something thin and important inside me. I didn't drop the dish. I didn't gasp. I didn't fold. I set the gate back with my hip and stepped in. Past the cooler sweating on the grass. Past the kids running in a blur of shoelaces and sticky fingers. Past the faces I knew from photos more than from visits. Some turned away as if they were busy with condensation and napkins. Some looked right through me like light through a clean window. I heard my name once, Claudia, in a tone people use when they discover a forgotten spoon in a drawer. I followed it to the long table. The folding chair offered its old groan when I sat, but it held me. I set the cobbler down and folded my hands. The spoon clinked against the dish, a bright small sound even the music couldn't drown. "Did you want a plate?" Tiffany asked. My son's wife wore a smile that didn't move her eyes. She smelled like a perfume that had traveled far to get here. The wind lifted the edge of her napkin the way a hand lifts a curtain. "I'm fine," I said. She nodded too quickly and drifted away like a boat untied. Andre stood near the grill, a bottle in his hand, telling a story about a coworker who never refilled the coffee pot. People laughed. He lifted his drink. "To family," he said. Glass touched glass. Good plastic touched good plastic. No one looked down the table at the woman who had taught him how to count by lining up navy beans. Kids ran past me 3 times. Shoes slapped dirt. Little elbows brushed my sleeve. No one said, "Hi, Grandma." I watched them race toward a future that didn't appear to include my chair. I remembered when those same legs were small enough to swing under my kitchen table, heels tapping the rung as they waited for cinnamon toast. The music changed. The lights warmed. The gnats found the glow and worshipped it. I stood when the plates needed stacking. I folded napkins with neat corners. I wiped the sticky rings left by red cups. I carried my cobbler, half-eaten, mostly by the kind ones who still believe dessert is a thank you, to the edge of the counter and waited for a place to set it that wasn't the trash. I heard that sentence again in my head, the one made of thin metal and poor judgment. Why is she even still alive? It didn't echo. Echoes are for canyons and regret. It just sat there, a short wire across a doorway waiting for someone to trip. I didn't leave. I went inside and rinsed the spoon. The water ran warm, then hot, then calm. I dried it with a towel that had a lemon embroidered in the corner, and tucked it back into my bag. I told Andre I was heading out. He said, "All right, Ma," like the word already belonged to the past. Tiffany waved the way people wave at parades. Open hand, quick, safe. The night air had cooled enough to make my forearms notice. The gate latch stuck again, loyal to its habit. I lifted, slid, and stepped through, closing it behind me with the patience I learned from years of teaching children not to slam themselves into rooms. On the sidewalk, the sound of music fell into a soft thud. Fireflies blinked along the hedge like tiny green secrets keeping themselves. I shifted the warm dish from one hand to the other and walked home with my back straight and my jaw unclenched. I thought about the old rule. Leave things better than you found them. I had wiped the table. I had stacked the plates. I had not argued with anyone's mouth. In my kitchen, I set the cobbler on the stove and watched steam climb into nothing. The clock ticked with its steady, ordinary truth. I washed the dish while the water whispered. When I dried it, the towel left a faint pattern of lemons across the glass like a blessing. I did not cry. I did not call. I poured tea into my oldest cup, the blue one with a chip that never cuts. I sat at the table where bills learn their place and grocery lists confess their ambition. I listened to a quiet that, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel empty. Felt like space. I made a decision. It did not arrive with thunder. It arrived like a key in a lock, simple, exact, final. Tomorrow I would begin. Sunday morning came in on the thin light that slips under curtains before the rest of the day remembers to wake. My kitchen is small but it knows me. The kettle that hums without fuss, the sugar jar with the missing lid, the stove that prefers patient hands. I set water to boil and took the peach cobbler dish from the counter. The glass felt cooler now, like a fever gone. My house makes a particular sound when it's honest with me. The low breath of the refrigerator, the dry tick of the wall clock, the soft rub of my slippers against the floor. I opened the window and let the air come in, carrying the damp smell of morning grass. Somewhere down the street someone started a car, and then thought better of it. I brewed tea strong enough to stand up on its own and carried it to the table. Sunlight drew a narrow stripe across the wood, catching the old scratches where children once banged spoons like drums. I set my cup on that stripe and felt it warm my palm. Maybe you know this feeling. The way a quiet room can tell the truth louder than a crowded one. Have you ever sat with a truth so loud you could hear it in the clock? I pulled a legal pad toward me. The yellow kind with a top spiral that likes to snag sweater sleeves. At the top, I wrote in small neat letters what I gave. Below that, I listed it like inventory in a store that needs to know where its stock has gone. $45,000, down payment for Andre and Tiffany's house. I remember the pen I used to sign that check. The way it left a bold line that looked confident even when my hand felt like a tremor. I told myself it was an investment in family. Interest paid in birthdays, in sleepovers, in quiet thanks that would arrive in casseroles and invitations. I did not ask for a seat at the table. I assumed the table had a chair with my name already stitched into it. Roof repair, $3,800. The roofer's forearms shiny with heat, the shingles stacked like slate books, the way the ladder scraped the gutter and made me wince. I paid because storms don't wait for budgets, and because I believed in shelter. Childcare, uncounted hours, but the body keeps score. I kept Aaliyah when schedules didn't match reality. Read the same book 12 nights in a row. Learned the art of tiny braids and patience. I sang old songs my mother sang to me, the kind with hand claps and promises. Groceries, bags heavy with fruit and milk, paper towels and vanilla. The big cereal boxes that boast of vitamins and cartoon animals. I bought extra gummy bears because they made little faces light up in a way that felt like sunrise. And then the repairs no one sees. Furnace service, a stubborn sink, an emergency dentist visit that came without warning and left with a bill. I didn't write everything down because some of it belonged to a part of me that was still learning to name itself. The kettle clicked off and the house said yes. I poured another cup and watched the steam lift, then vanish. Cinnamon from last night still whispered from the oven. I wiped the counter for no reason other than the comfort in the motion. You learn with time that tidiness can be a prayer. Mom, I'll make it right. I can hear Andre saying it even now, in that tone men use when the story moves faster than their hands. He said it the day I paid the roofer, the day I watched him sign a loan he didn't fully read, the day Tiffany said she would plan a proper Mother's Day and then posted pictures of brunch that didn't have room for my chair. I'll make it right has lived so long in the air that it turned into weather, overcast, sometimes with a chance of change. On the wall by the back door hangs a small wooden clock my husband, Frank, fixed the year before he died. He was careful with time. Yesterday when I stood in that backyard, I remembered the way Frank would shake his head at shoddy work. If he had been there, he would have looked that sentence in the mouth. Why is she even still alive? And he would have said, baby, that ain't right. He would have put a steady hand between me and nonsense. The quiet felt full, not empty. I rinsed my cup and set it upside down on the towel to dry. I pulled open the drawer with the neat folders, birth certificates, invoices, the kind of papers that make a life legible to strangers. My fingers found the tab that read Andre House. The edges were soft from being held, even when I didn't need to hold them. I carried it to the table like a careful nurse carries a chart. Inside, the purchase agreement with its confident signatures, the deed that spelled their names like a promise, and my letter dated and polite. No repayment expected. I had typed it on the community center computer because my own was slow that winter. I tucked in phrases about love and opportunity, and I numbered the pages as if order were a kind of insurance. Looking at it now, I could see a thin glow of hope between the lines, the way sun sometimes finds the seam in a curtain. I breathed out and wrote another heading on my pad. What I am owed. Then I crossed it out. I didn't want to live like a ledger. I wanted to live like a woman whose name fit in her own mouth. Still something else tugged at me. I noticed a photocopy I didn't remember approving. A bank card, secondary user, Tiffany J. Hemsworth. The font looked official. The date sat on the page like a small coin. My stomach tightened, not with rage but with clarity. I turned to the back of the folder and found 3 tiny receipts clipped together. ATM withdrawals no bigger than a grocery list but consistent. A slow drip can cut stone if you let it. I set everything in a neat stack and aligned the corners with my palm. Then I reached for the phone. My hands didn't shake. The numbers knew where to go. "Lena," I said when she answered, her voice calm and already awake. "I have some things I need to understand." "Bring everything," she said. I could hear the click of her pen through the line, steady and ready. "We'll make tea." I hung up and looked around my kitchen. The small light, the clean counter, the chair with the worn rung where children used to rest their heels. The truth in the clock kept ticking, patient as always. I closed the folder, slid it into my bag, and smoothed the edge like a mother smoothing a collar. The morning had only just begun, and so had I. I pulled the gray file box from the bottom cabinet that sticks unless you nudge it with your hip and set it on the kitchen table where the early light lay like a thin ribbon across the wood. And the simple act calmed my breath because order has a kindness of its own. My fingers knew the right tab before I read it. The one that said Andre House in my neat block letters, written on a winter day when I believed that putting ink on paper could hold a family together. The folder opened with a small sigh and the first page looked back at me like a portrait that never learned how to tell the whole story. The purchase agreement sat on top, sturdy, official. A field of rectangles that had once felt like safe ground. Our names were not paired, only theirs, and my signature lived on a different page. The letter where I said no repayment expected because I thought love would pay its own way if you gave it a wide enough road. I set that letter down gently and the edge of it pressed a pale crease into the towel on the table. And I thought of every crease I had pressed into my days so other people could walk across them without tripping. Under the agreement came the deed, a copy of the insurance, a list of repairs I had funded when storms did what storms do, and receipts I kept not for proof but for memory because sometimes a receipt is the only witness that will not change its testimony. A neon marker line ran along certain totals, bright and hopeful, and I felt my chest pinch at the sight because the color looked like the kind of happiness I used to draw around the names of people I trusted. The pinch led me to the back of the folder where thin papers hid like nervous sparrows, and there I found a photocopy of a bank card application, secondary user, Tiffany J. Hemsworth, a date that sat quiet but heavy, and a signature that did not belong to me. My name appeared as the primary and the box for authorize was checked, yet I did not remember a day at the bank or a pen in my hand or a clerk sliding a clipboard toward me. A chill, quick and honest, moved through my arms. I set the page beside the letter and saw how neatly one hope had made room for one permission that did not feel like mine. I reached farther and found 3 small receipts clipped together. Amounts too small to wake a thunderclap and yet repeated on a rhythm that made the clock on the wall seem louder. 40 here, 60 there, cash, then the word fee next to storage unit, and the dates walked forward month after month as steadily as a metronome. That is when the quiet changed shape and a clear line snapped through the fog in my head. A twist arrived without music. The little losses were not accidents. The pattern was the message. Paper does not bend to charm. It speaks the way truth speaks when it has nothing left to prove. I closed my eyes for a moment and saw the backyard again, the string lights, the plates, the sentence that tried to make me small. And I felt something in me reject that size like a body rejects a splinter. I opened my eyes and lifted the folder back to the center of the table, and began an inventory so calm that it felt like prayer. Purchase agreement present. Deed copy present. Donation letters for past school supplies present. Furnace repair paid by me present. Authorized secondary card not remembered present. Repeated withdrawals present. Storage unit fees present. I wrote the words in tidy lines and every tidy line steadied me. The air from the window carried in the smell of cut grass and distant rain, and it reached across the room like a hand I could hold. I thought of Aaliyah borrowing my sweater last month and how the sleeves came back with a faint powdery scent that was not from my house, and the memory touched the receipts like 2 wires meeting and lighting a small clear bulb. I did not chase the thought with blame. I followed it with attention. I checked the folder again and found a business card from a roofer tucked against the cardboard, and a tiny envelope with a spare key I had given them during the last hail repair. And I realized that keys multiply when trust is lazy. I placed the key in a ceramic bowl and listened to the dull tap it made. A tiny sound that still managed to speak. Then I turned the marker over in my hand. The tip was dry and I pressed it to the margin of my legal pad and watched a thin, stubborn line appear. Faint but present. And I whispered to the room that faint but present is still a line. My throat felt tight but my hands did not shake. This is important, the body said. Stay. I wrote out the timeline from the date on the card copy to the most recent fee for the storage unit, and the timeline answered with its own certainty. The discovery did not break me. It rearranged me. The twist was simple and that is why it hurt. People can spend you a little at a time until the jar looks empty and no one remembers when it happened. I reached for the phone then stopped because action without care is just noise. I breathed slowly and looked up at the clock Frank had fixed, the second hand working like a patient foot, and I felt him in the room the way faith lives in the seams of an ordinary day. Not anger, he would say. Clarity. I chose clarity. I took a photo of the card copy, the receipts, the letter that had once sounded like a hymn, and I slid them into a smaller folder so they could travel without bruising. I imagined walking into a bank with Miss Patel in a glass office and the reflection of my face in the window, and the thought did not make me afraid. It made me ready. My tea had cooled and left a ring on the table that wiped away with one circle of the cloth. I wiped it and said out loud that some marks vanish when you stop feeding them. Then I dialed the number I had not used in a year, Lena Moore. The woman who can make a contract tell the truth even when it resists. She answered on the second ring with that even voice of hers. I told her I needed to understand some things. She said bring everything, and the words landed like a key turning in a careful lock. I hung up and held the folder against my chest for a breath, not clutching, only measuring its weight, and in that small weight I felt the shape of a choice. The climax inside me rose firm and clean. I would not live as a ledger in someone else's pocket. I would not be the quiet drawer where other people stored what they did not want to face. I slipped the folder into my bag, checked that my ID was where it belonged, and smoothed my skirt the way my mother taught me before hard rooms. Investigation had begun. The truth was not a storm now. It was a road and I had shoes. Lena lives in a brick house with a small porch and a neat row of marigolds that keep their own watch, and when I stepped inside the air carried a clear scent of lemon cleaner under a softer note of peppermint, the kind of tidy that lets your shoulders drop without asking permission. Her front room had 2 chairs facing a low table with a glass jar of white mints no one ever seems to take, and a desk in the corner stacked with quiet folders, each one squared to the edge like a promise. She waved me toward the chair that did not creak and said let us make tea. And the kettle began its gentle talk while I set my bag on the table and took out the folder that had earned its place by the weight of what it held. We did not rush. She poured tea into thick cups that kept the heat and passed me one with both hands like we were exchanging a careful truth. I told her about the backyard sentence that tried to shrink me and about the file drawer that decided to speak, about the card copy with a signature I did not remember and the small withdrawals that kept time with the clock on my wall. She listened like listening was work she respected. Her eyes steady, her breath even. When she finally spoke, it was not a lecture. It was a path. You cannot reclaim a gift once it has been given this way, she said. The purchase stands and the deed stands, and we will not chase what will not return. Then she leaned in like a mother fixing a collar, and gave me the part my heart wanted more than comfort. But you are not powerless. The room inhaled with me. Power has different doors, she said, and some you open with a pen, not a shout. First, we revoke your old power of attorney, the one signed during your fall when fear signed alongside you. We put a clean revocation on record so no one can act in your name without your fresh voice. Second, we review your will and every beneficiary line that hides in papers people do not read. Bank accounts, insurance, retirement, any place that tries to write your legacy without asking your consent. We correct it so that your choices stand even when you are resting. Third, we consider a living trust in your name, so that when your story reaches its last chapter, the house you live in now, and the savings that carry your work will follow instructions you wrote with a clear hand. She paused to let the words find their chairs in my head. A trust, she said, can be as simple as a clean sentence. While you live, you hold the keys. When you are gone, it speaks for you and it does not stutter. I heard the clock in her hallway and thought of Frank nodding from the good chair, the way he would approve of a plan that does not waste motion. I told her about the small cash withdrawals and the fees for the storage unit. She tapped her pen once, not impatient, simply awake. Paper walks straight, she said, and this paper is headed to the bank. We will ask for a full printout, and we will set alerts that speak to you before money leaves your name. I know a manager, Ms. Patel, who respects elders and prefers facts to fog. Go to her with your shoulders back. Take these copies and take your driver's license and ask for a review of authorized users and for a freeze on anything that pretends to be you without your yes. I asked her what to do with the way my chest tightened whenever I thought about the signature that did not feel like mine. She passed me a peppermint and said, keep your breath cool while you act warm, because anger burns too fast for long work. Then she pulled a blank form from a neat stack and wrote revocation at the top in letters that looked like a straight road. We filled the lines together, my name steady where it belonged, the date honest, the witness lines prepared for the notary down the street who knows Lena by first name. She added another paper, a simple change to the will, a clean removal of people who had already removed me from the room in every way that counted, and a space to add the shelter I had spoken of on nights when I needed to remember that women carry each other across hard ground. She asked if I wanted to name Aaliyah in a small way that honors her without feeding anyone else, perhaps keepsake items and a scholarship line through a fund inside the trust, nothing that invites hands that are not hers. The thought of my granddaughter reading a book paid for by a line with my name on it made my throat warm in a good way, and I nodded. We talked about the church in town and the way community can heal or it can humiliate, and she said truth does not need an audience to be true, but sometimes an audience needs truth to remember its manners. I told her about Pastor Green and the homecoming night and how I would not call names but I would call the room to attention if attention was required. She smiled with one corner of her mouth as if to say that dignity can be louder than any microphone. She slid a legal pad toward me and said, write the steps like a grocery list so your day can hold them without panic. I wrote revoke the old power of attorney, update will and beneficiaries, schedule bank review with Ms. Patel, change security questions, consider post office box, replace front and back door locks with new keys, photograph and record every document, place copies in fireproof box and with a trusted neighbor. When I finished the list, the kettle was quiet and the tea had become exactly right for drinking. Lena checked the card copy and the receipts and drew tiny circles around dates that formed their own story. She did not accuse anyone. She respected the facts. Then she looked at me, not at the papers, and said, you are writing your way back to yourself. That is the work. I felt a lift in my spine as if someone had pulled a thread through me and tightened it just enough to make the fabric smooth. I reached into my purse and took out a small sheet of stationery, the kind with faint flowers in the corner that a neighbor gave me for Christmas, and I wrote Andre at the top in letters that carried their own history. I drew a straight line through it, not a slash of rage, a considered stroke, and under it I wrote the sentence that had come to me in the kitchen when the quiet decided to help. Not erasing, choosing. I folded the paper and tucked it into the pocket of my folder where the trust will someday live. The peppermint melted slow and left the air cool in my throat. The lemon cleaner scent felt like a clean floor after rain. I stood, thanked Lena, and promised to call after the bank visit. Outside, the marigolds kept their watch and the afternoon had that bright softness that makes a road look like the right idea. I did not feel small. I felt precise. The list sat on my table like a small map that knew where it was going, and I decided to follow it without talking myself out of the first step, because thinking can become a stall when fear borrows your voice. I put on my good shoes and the blue cardigan with firm buttons because sometimes a day needs to feel the weight of your intention. At Lena's office the notary greeted me by name, and the revocation paper lay ready on a brown clipboard that still smelled faintly of ink. I read every line out loud in my head and answered each word with yes, that is mine, and yes, that is correct. I signed where the line waited. I dated the corner. The notary watched with quiet respect and stamped the page with a calm that felt like a gate closing on an old field. I did not tremble. I did not rush. I breathed through the moment the way you breathe before stepping off a porch into new light. Outside the sky had the clear blue of a bowl washed and set to dry. I stood under it for one slow count and let the relief land in my shoulders. Then I walked to the post office and stood in the line that always forms on a weekday morning. The floor was a tired color and the walls wore posters that tried to smile. When it was my turn, I asked for a post office box in a voice that surprised me by sounding steady without being hard. The clerk slid a small card toward me, and I filled it with the neat truths that make an address belong to someone. I chose a box that fit my palm and my plans. The key was small and bright, and when it turned in the lock the first time it made a tidy sound like a promise finding its note. I tucked the key into my purse and felt how a little metal can quiet a large worry. On the way home I stopped at the hardware store where the aisles smell like new metal and dust. I asked for a locksmith recommendation and wrote the number in my notebook instead of on a scrap that could wander off. Back in my kitchen I called and the man said he could come that afternoon. I made tea to keep my hands from doing busy work that was not the work. When the locksmith arrived he was polite and young with careful shoes and clean hands. He asked which doors and I showed him the front and the back and the side that sticks when it rains. He worked without chatter. The old locks came out with a sound like a stubborn word finally being spoken. The new ones slid in with small turns and clicks that folded into each other like good stitches. I watched without hovering and kept the little screws in a dish so none would roll away. He cut 4 keys on the tailgate of his truck and tested each one in each lock. One for my purse. One for the fireproof box. One for Ms. Lorraine across the hedge. One for the safe deposit to be kept with my papers. He handed them to me on a ring and the metal chimed in the afternoon quiet. The sound startled me with its beauty. It was not loud. It was clean. It felt like bells from a far church saying there will be service on time. My throat warmed and I pressed the ring in my palm as if to take its temperature. I paid him and tipped more than the bill asked because gratitude likes to wear shoes. After he left I stood in the doorway and turned the new key slowly. The deadbolt found its seat and the door gave a satisfied hush. A small twist there and a small twist back and the house changed from a hallway anyone could wander to a room with my name on it. That is when the emotion rose fast and bright. Not anger. Relief so sudden it made my knees notice the floor. I held the doorframe and let the feeling pass through like a wave that knows where to go. Sign. Stamp. Breathe. The words came on their own and chose their places. I set the extra keys where they belonged and wrote each location on a card in my precise hand so memory could nap without guilt. Then I gathered every document and placed them in the fireproof box with the quiet ceremony my mother used for communion cups. I added copies to a second envelope labeled for the bank review with Miss Patel, and slid it into my bag so there would be no morning scramble. I changed my security questions on the phone with the patience of a person shelling peas. I picked answers that would mean something to me and nothing to a stranger. The first dog we loved on that good block. The name of the song my mother hummed while she ironed. The street where Frank kissed me for the first time on a Tuesday when the sky looked washed. Each answer locked into place with a tiny clack and each clack stitched a seam closed inside my ribs. Near dusk Ms. Lorraine tapped on the screen and called through that she was making a pot of greens and did I want some. I told her yes please and could I give her a key to keep. Her face softened into the kind of yes a person gives when they have been waiting to be helpful. She held the key like it was a small important bird. I felt a rush of gratitude so quick it almost stung. Another twist then. The sense of being held where you thought you were alone. When she left I sat at the table and wrote the day's ledger but I did not title it what I spent or what I lost. Called it what I chose. Revoked the old power of attorney. Secured a post office box. Replaced the locks. Assigned the keys. Organized the papers. Prepared for the bank. I looked at the list and it did not look like battle. It looked like housekeeping for the soul. For a breath I felt the ache of all the years I did not choose this way. The ache stepped forward like an old friend who had learned new manners and then it stepped back. The house was quiet. The clock told the truth without scolding. I stood up and washed my cup and put it in the rack. Night pressed a gentle palm to the window. I tried each lock again and each answered the same way. Yes. You are safe. Yes. You decided. Yes. Tomorrow can come. The bank lobby felt like a weekday classroom where everyone had learned to whisper, and the fluorescent lights poured a clean white that made the tile look cooler than it was, and for a moment I watched the way people held their paperwork the way travelers hold tickets for trains they must not miss. Then I squared my shoulders and asked for Miss Patel by name, and a teller with careful nails guided me toward a glass office near a pothose plant that trailed down its stake like a green ribbon that had learned patience. Miss Patel rose when I reached the door and greeted me as if the day had not yet had a chance to trouble us. She shook my hand once, offered a chair that did not wobble, and waited while I set my folder on the desk with the deliberate motion of someone placing a sleeping child in a safe bed. The room was quiet but not cold, and the glass gave a faint reflection of my face, a woman who had decided to be exact. I told her I needed to review authorized users and recent activity, that I had concerns I wanted to put in order, and as I spoke I slid copies of the secondary card application and the small receipts to the edge of her desk so the paper could speak for itself. She listened without flinching, fingers resting on the keyboard as if the keys were muscles waiting for a signal. And when I finished, she asked for my identification and a second form of the same, and I handed over my license and my post office box slip because order can be proved. She typed my name with the economy of someone who respects time. And the monitor threw a soft glow against the glass while the pothose leaf touched the window as if it wanted to read. "Here we are," she said, and her tone held no pity, only the simple weight of facts. She scrolled through a list that moved like a slow river. "There is a secondary card under your account, issued 18 months ago. Name on the card Tiffany J. Hemsworth. Authorized by a form on file." She tapped a tab and the charges arranged themselves into neat lines that my eyes could follow. Small cash withdrawals, regular as a metronome, the amounts just under the threshold that makes a person notice when they are tired. Purchases that smelled like errands, a pharmacy, a big box store that sells cleaning supplies and candles, and then a repeating fee labeled storage unit, all of it steady, all of it calm. The way a drip carves a groove in stone while everyone is busy talking about storms. A warmth rose under my collar that was not rage but recognition. The sensation of a puzzle whose last piece is finally asking to sit down. I asked for the dates and she printed the last 12 months while we looked at the rest on the screen. The paper rolling out with a satisfying chatter that sounded like a choir of tiny typewriters singing one note. I told her I had not signed anything in branch for a secondary user, that I did not remember a clipboard or a pen or a day that would explain the neat check in the authorized box. And she nodded in a way that meant I had been heard without being managed. "We can verify signature images and compare with your specimen," she said. "And we can remove the secondary card today. And we can turn on alerts that send a message to your phone whenever money leaves your account. And we can require in-person validation before any future user is added to your name." The relief that came then moved fast and bright, and I had to grip the edge of the desk the way you hold to a rail on a staircase that curves. I gave consent for the signature review. I asked that the secondary card be cancelled at once, and I asked that my online access be protected with fresh questions, answers I had already chosen while standing in my kitchen watching steam from the kettle write its own sermon in the air. "We will do this step by step," she said, and her fingers began their careful dance. She removed the card and the record marked it as closed. She added alerts for every withdrawal over $1 because small losses are the ones that tell longer truths. She walked me through new questions and I answered with names and places that only family would know and only a respectful family would remember. The first hymn I ever sang alone, the street where my mother bought my first dress for a school concert, the middle name that Frank used when he wrote me notes on paydays. She paused at the storage unit line and asked if I recognized the company, and I said no, and we added a note to the account so that any further attempt to pay that fee would ping my phone like a doorbell rung by someone who forgot their manners. While she typed, I noticed the faint scent of cologne in the office, not hers, a trace from a customer who had sat where I sat, and it mixed with a lighter floral thread like something a teenager might spritz before a photograph, and the blend pulled through my memory to a sweater sleeve Aaliyah had returned with a powdery sweetness clinging to it, and the thought reached for the receipts like one wire reaching for another, and the small bulb inside my chest lit with a pure steady light. "This is the part where people doubt themselves," Ms. Patel said softly, "not about facts, about whether they are allowed to defend their own name." "You are allowed." I thanked her with words that felt too short and asked if we could print everything she had on screen for me to take to my attorney, and she nodded and told the printer to work, and the pages came with dates and merchants and amounts that lined up like a row of chairs when a room is ready for truth. As the printer finished, she turned the monitor a little and showed me a chart of activity that sketched a quiet hill for each month. The hill built from those small withdrawals and the steady fee, and the picture made me breathe through my nose the way you do when you decide to lift a box that is heavier than you hoped. I signed for the changes and she handed me a folder the bank keeps for people who need to carry more than paper, and we tucked the statements into it, then the confirmation that the secondary card was closed, then a page that listed my new alerts with a test text that buzzed my phone to prove the doorbell rang. I looked at the stack and felt taller in my chair. "Paper does not lie," I said, and the words did not tremble. She smiled the kind of smile that lives in the eyes first and said, "Bring these to your attorney, and if you need me again, ask for me by name." We stood and shook hands the way people used to, one clean shake to mark a promise, and I stepped back through the glass door into the lobby where the whispering had changed to a low busy hum. Outside the sun sat high and kind and the pothose leaf rested against the window like a small palm. I walked to the curb with the folder under my arm and the weight was right. Not heavy, exact, and at the corner the breeze lifted the edges of the pages just enough to make a sound like a key tapping a tabletop. I thought of the storage unit and the receipts and the way the dates marched, and my feet turned toward home where the fireproof box waited open like a quiet mouth ready to keep what should be kept and tell what should be told. Ms. Lorraine drove because she said I should not have to think about parking on a day like this, and I let her because sometimes letting someone steer is another way of staying strong. The storage facility sat behind a strip of shops with peeling paint where the sun pressed hard on everything and made the air feel like a hand on your back. The office smelled faintly of coffee that had cooled, and the manager wore a name tag that flashed when he moved, and he asked for my identification and the unit number from the printout and then passed me a clipboard to sign. I signed with the patience of someone who has learned that rushed ink is how trouble hides, and I asked for a fresh lock to replace whatever waited behind the door. He told us the unit sat on the third row by the chain-link fence and handed me a code for the gate. The keypad beeped in clean little notes as I entered the numbers, and the gate slid open with a sigh that made my stomach answer. We walked past units with orange doors that looked like closed mouths. The gravel pushed under our shoes and a dry wind lifted the edge of my blouse. When we reached the unit, the metal door looked ordinary in the way a lie looks ordinary until you lift it. I bent to the lock and fitted the key the manager had given me, and the shackle jumped like a small animal, and then the door rolled up with a sound that lived between thunder and a long yawn. Dust lifted into the light like shaken flour. The air was cool and smelled of cardboard and old glue and the far suite of dryer sheets. Boxes sat in stacks that did not match, some taped with care and some closed with nothing but hope. A plastic bin with a cracked lid leaned against a folding chair I recognized from my old porch, the one Frank had painted white one summer and declared good enough to watch sunsets. I stepped in and my breath made a small cloud. On the left a garment bag hung from a metal rod, the kind used for winter coats, and on the right several shopping bags rested with their handles looped like the ears of patient animals. One bag bore the name of a store that sells shoes with prices that can make a person blush. Another bore the logo of a gym where people go to run in place. My stomach tightened, not with anger, with recognition. I reached for the top box and slid it toward me. Inside lay photographs in frames and loose in envelopes, faces that belonged to my walls and not to this dim room. I lifted one. Andre at 8 missing a front tooth. Me with flour on my cheek, pretending not to notice the camera. The glass had a scratch that caught the light like a thin scar. Under the photos sat a folded doily my mother crocheted when her knuckles were still kind. I set everything back with a care that made my hands feel older and braver at once. Ms. Lorraine knelt by another box and lifted the lid, and then looked at me with a question in her eyes that asked if I was ready. I nodded. Inside this one lay a small tin with a paper label that read keepsakes in a careful hand that was not mine. The lid stuck and then gave, and there it was, my wedding ring in a plastic bag meant for buttons, the diamond pressed against cheap plastic like a mouth behind glass. Next to it lay the modest band Frank had worn until the day the hospital kept his clothes in a brown bag, and I brought them home alone. Seeing both rings stored in a tin inside a unit I had never visited sent a clean pain through me. I did not cry. I stood. I let the pain stand with me. On a low shelf sat a gray box with a sticker that said fragile in faded red. I lifted it and the weight told me before the label did. It was the urn that had lived on my mantle for 3 years, the one I had moved beside the lilies each spring, and it should not have been here. I set it down slowly and the cool metal met the concrete with a soft knock. Behind the urn a shoebox with a lid that did not fit held programs from church services and graduation and a funeral for a cousin. And under the programs I found a folded photograph of me and Frank on the porch the day we finished repainting the railing, my face tilted into the light like a person catching a blessing. I whispered I see you and slipped the picture into my bag. The twist sharpened then. Under a garment bag labeled coats I found my old Sunday hat with its small satin bow pressed flat, and beside it a receipt for a new coat purchased last month with a name on the card that matched the secondary user. The dates on the receipt lined up with the bank printout in my folder. A quiet heat rose in my throat. They stored my memories like off-season coats. I felt the sentence settle over the room like a clear roof. I turned and looked at the shopping bags again, the ones so proud of their names, and in one I found a pair of bright sneakers and a set of leggings with a tag that described them as sculpting, and tucked in the corner a small bottle of floral spray that smelled like the faint powder on a sweater sleeve I had folded last week. My chest rose once hard and then steadied. Ms. Lorraine placed her hand on the doorframe and said softly, "Do you want to sit?" I shook my head and took out my phone and photographed everything the way a clerk records inventory after a storm. The urn, the ring, the doily, the hats, the receipts, the bags. I made a list out loud so that the room would hear me taking the room back. Lorraine nodded each time like a witness who knows that stillness can be the truest kind of help. When I had all the pictures I needed, I closed the boxes I had opened and stacked them in a separate column. Items to reclaim when the paperwork finished telling its story. I took the new lock from my bag and slid it through the latch and clicked it shut, so that while truth was moving, no fresh mischief would move with it. The clean click sounded final and kind. On the drive back, we kept the windows cracked and the air did its slow work. The sun leaned toward afternoon and turned every stop sign into a red certainty. I watched the lines on the road reach forward and I understood that my footsteps would follow them. At home, I placed the photos on my table and laid out the receipts where the light could read them, and then I called Mr. Carter, the realtor with the calm voice who helped a neighbor sell last winter without a fuss. I told him I was putting my house into a living trust with instructions that one day it would be sold and the proceeds given to a shelter that keeps women whole. And I asked him to explain the cleanest steps so that when the time came there would be no confusion and no grasping hands. He spoke the way good men speak when they want to be useful. He said the trust would own the house when I signed, that I would remain in full control as trustee while I lived, that a successor of my choosing would handle the sale after I rested, that we could prepare a binder with copies of everything and a simple letter of intent so no one could pretend to be surprised. He offered to meet and make a schedule that did not rush me and did not let moss grow on my decisions. I thanked him and felt the ache in my chest soften into something like strength. I looked at the photos again and picked up the one from the porch and held it to my heart for a count of 3. Then I set it beside the new keys and the bank folder and the notary stamp, and I said to the quiet room, we are not done but we are steady. The day had given me a climax I did not want and a clarity I needed. The path ahead did not feel like revenge. Felt like repair. He came at dusk when the porch held the last of the day like a bowl holds warm water, and the cicadas had just begun their evening work. And I knew it was Andre before I saw him because the engine in his car idled with the same uneven hum it had when he was a teenager teaching himself to park by feel. He did not cut the engine right away. He sat there as if the car could teach him what to say. Then the sound died, a door clicked, and his shoes found the walkway that Frank once edged with a string to keep the bricks straight. The screen rattled once under his knuckles, and then the front door carried a dull knock that felt like a question. I stood in the hall and let my breath arrive first. I opened the door with my hand on the new key, as if to remind both of us that I knew how it worked. Andre looked older than he did at noon and younger than he should have. He tried to smile with only the top half of his face. You changed the locks, he said, and his voice slid between accusation and surprise like a foot searching for the next stair. I changed the locks, I said, and for a count of 3 we both let the words sit with their own weight. He shifted his stance and put his hands in his pockets the way men do when they want to seem patient. Mom, he said, Tiffany says you blocked our numbers. You did all this because of one comment taken out of context. She was tired. It was not personal. I watched a moth spin near the porch light and felt my chest stay level. It was not one comment, I said. It was years of comments and years of small takings that expected me not to notice because I loved you. And I slid the bank printouts across the small table by the entry so he could see the columns line like rails, and on top of the paper I placed the photo I had taken of my wedding ring in a plastic bag inside a tin inside a unit I did not rent. His mouth opened, then closed, not in shock, in calculation, as if he were checking a mental schedule to find a time to argue. That is not what it looks like, he began, and I raised my hand to pause the sentence before it tried to finish itself. Then show me what it looks like, I said. Tell me that a ring and an urn and a doily made by my mother belong in a dark room behind a rolling door next to a chair that does not fit this family anymore. His eyes moved to the photo, then to the printouts, then back to me. He pointed at the page with the secondary card entry and said, you signed that. It says you authorized it. That is what the bank told us. My name is printed there, I said. My hand did not sign that form. And even if I had, respect does not hide my life in a storage unit and call it tidying. He took a step forward as if to cross my threshold by habit, then noticed the line where the tile met the mat and he stopped. The habit faltered. That is when the air changed. I saw the boy who had once tried to lie about the broken window, how he looked at the ground and then at the sky, anywhere but at the truth that waited at his feet. Mom, he said, this is getting out of hand. People are talking. Tiffany says you embarrassed her at church with the way you left early. She says you are making us look bad. The word us arrived like a stone rolled into the room. I felt it hit and settle. I let silence explain the difference between us and me. I do not manage other people's faces, I said. I manage my own name. His jaw worked like he was chewing a slice of pride that had been cut too thick. He tried another path. We can fix this, he said. I can help you with the bills. We can add you back onto everything so you do not feel left out. Just stop making this a big deal in front of people. The words did not match the truth on the table, and a small part of me wanted to sit down with that child who was not a child anymore and press the problem flat with a warm palm and a soft voice, the way I calmed monsters under beds when monsters were made of shadows. Another part of me, the part that had learned to stand where the floor tilts, set both feet. This is not about being left out, I said. This is about being left with the bill while my history is boxed away. This is about a sentence spoken in my hearing that asked why I am even still alive. He flinched and a low sound escaped him, not quite a groan. I did not say that, he insisted, and the truth is he did not. But he had laughed and the laugh had sounded like permission. You laughed, I said, and my eyes did not waver. He looked toward the street as if the car could start itself and drive him back into a version of the day where this conversation did not exist. Then he looked past me into my hallway where the photos had once stood, and now a small bowl held a set of keys that belonged only to me. He saw the change, the way people see new paint on an old wall. He tried again, softer now. What do you want from me, he asked, and he had never understood that sometimes the question itself is the proof. I want nothing you are unwilling to give without being asked, I said. I want the truth to stand in our kitchen without being pushed. I want my name to pay only for what I choose. He covered his mouth with his hand for a moment, and I recognized the gesture from when he was little and surprised himself by telling the truth before he meant to. I reached into the folder and slid the list from the bank and the notarized revocation and a copy of my updated will a few inches toward him. These tell you what I have already done, I said. He did not touch them. He stared as if the paper might read itself aloud and spare him the labor. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. A car on the next block laughed its horn. A leaf lifted and settled against the screen. The climax came without noise. I heard my voice find its balance, the way a choir finds the note by listening harder. I am not asking, I said. I am informing. I will take back what belongs to me by law and by dignity. I will not sit in rooms where I am tolerated instead of welcomed. I will not keep your secrets that ask me to vanish. If you want a door to me, you will knock with honesty, not with convenience. He looked at me then, really looked, and the day ran its hand through his hair and made him look like both my boy and a man lost on a map he drew himself. You will not even talk to Tiffany, he said, and it sounded small. I said I will speak to anyone who chooses truth over performance. There is nothing else to say tonight. I stepped back a half pace, not retreat boundary. He understood. He did not step forward. He did not ask to come in. He nodded once, the kind of nod that is less agreement than acknowledgement that a new fact has entered the room. He turned away and walked down the steps slower than he had climbed them. At the car he paused and put his hand on the roof as if holding on to a thought that did not want to stay. Then he got in, started the engine, and left the curb like a person learning how to drive again. I closed the door. I did not slam it. I turned the new key and the lock accepted its work with a clean click that belonged to this house and to me. The quiet that followed did not feel empty. It felt earned. I met Lena on a bright morning and we sat at her round table with 2 mugs of tea while the folder lay between us like a quiet engine waiting to run. She said, today we write your choices and make them hold. She opened a new binder, slid in sleeves labeled identity, property, accounts, instructions, then placed a sheet on top with the words Claudia May Johnson Living Trust in sturdy type. My name looked steady on the page. Lena read each clause aloud. While I live trustee and beneficiary, she said, your hands on the keys. When you rest, the house and savings will be sold with care, and the proceeds sent to Greenway Women's Shelter. We added a letter of intent that spoke plain. Sell at fair value, pay honest debts, deliver the balance to the shelter director with a simple note for women who leave without shoes. No drama. Only instructions. Lena moved to my will and beneficiaries. We removed Andre from every line and removed Tiffany from the fog where she liked to stand. We added a small bequest for Aaliyah that sounded like love grown wise. Keepsakes that tell her where she comes from, my quilt, a locket with a tiny photo, and a scholarship line inside the trust that will cover 1 year of books, paid directly to the school. A twist rose then, not cruel, only clear. For years I had written everyone else into my margins and left my own name floating. Today the ink gathered me back. Lena asked for a successor trustee. We chose a professional from a firm she trusted, someone who files neatly and answers the phone. I initialed and felt the old ache step aside. She placed 3 signature pages in a line and set the notary stamp within reach. Read once more and sign when the words feel like your own, she said. I read. I signed my full name in careful strokes that did not wobble. The notary watched with patient eyes. The stamp pressed down with a firm click, and the ink rose like stitches along a seam that had waited too long to be closed. Action moved forward. We filled change of beneficiary forms for the bank account that holds the steady money, for the small life policy, for the modest retirement that still carried my years. Primary now the trust. Contingent none. The phrases looked plain because truth had done the hard part already. We drafted a notice to any institution that might pretend not to understand. This letter confirms that future access must be approved by the trustee. We added my phone number and my post office box so the world would come to my lock and not to my porch. Lena slid a pale blue folder across the table and said, "This is your trust packet. Keep it safe at home and place a copy in your safe deposit box. Give 1 sealed copy to the shelter director so they can plan bravely." I asked if a copy could sit with Pastor Green for safekeeping. The church sometimes serves as a vault when families forget their vows. Lena said a pastor who honors elders is a good bank. We added a brief cover note. "Please hold this sealed packet for Claudia, to be opened by the successor trustee upon notice." By midday the binder had weight. It steadied me. I paid Lena and she told me to eat before making calls so my voice would land with strength. On the walk home the sun sat high and kind. I stopped at the print shop and made 2 certified copies of the key pages so no single drawer could hold my future hostage. I bought a fireproof sleeve and wrote my name on it in ink that did not bleed. At home I laid the packet on the table and opened the windows to let the air witness. I called the insurance office and we changed the beneficiary to the trust. I called the retirement company and read the new instructions with the calm of a person who had signed her way back to herself. Then I sat with a note card and wrote a sentence to Aaliyah. "Baby, I am building a road for your feet. Books will be waiting at the next turn. I will show you the packet when you visit so you can see how a woman keeps a promise to herself and still makes room for hope." I placed the note in an envelope with a small sticker from the neighbor girl, because even serious days can carry a bright thing. Near evening a low swell of feeling rose, not sadness, something like relief braided with pride. The climax was quiet and full. I was not pointing a finger. I was building a map. I was not breaking a home. I was choosing where the light should go. I brewed tea and held the warm mug and asked the listeners in my heart a question. Have you ever signed a paper and felt your spine stand up straighter? Like a line finding its answer. I tucked the trust packet into the fireproof sleeve, set 1 copy in the safe box bag, and slipped the pastor copy into my purse. I locked the front door and the back door and felt the clicks answer each other like friends across a porch. The house exhaled and so did I. Not tears. Trust. Not noise. Instruction. The day was done and it had chosen me back. Sunday arrived with the sound of soft shoes on church steps and the gentle shuffle of programs being passed down pews, and I walked up the aisle with my head level and my folder tucked under my arm like a book I was not ready to lend. The stained glass sent slow colors along the backs of people I had known for years, and the organ warmed the room the way a good oven warms a kitchen before the first pan goes in. Pastor Green greeted me with a nod that felt like a clean handshake in the heart. He took his place at the pulpit and welcomed the congregation with a voice that always makes children sit taller. We sang a hymn about honesty that keeps its coat through every season, and then he spoke about the homecoming fundraiser that would gather the whole town next week under one roof with one purpose. He asked for volunteers for pies and for ushers, and for the team that counts donations in a quiet back room where numbers learn to tell the truth. The amen that answered him was soft and certain. I felt the folder grow heavier in the bend of my arm. Not with dread, with intention. After service the lobby filled with the pleasant traffic of a small town. The talk of aunts and uncles and neighbors who have earned the right to use those titles without paperwork. I stood near the bulletin board and listened to the sound of us. Then Tiffany made her entrance the way a breeze will find a door that is not all the way closed. Her perfume arrived a step before she did. She laughed with 3 women who love a little storm if it keeps the afternoon interesting. I did not move. She glanced in my direction and then leaned into her circle with a stage whisper that did not want to be private. Claudia has been confused, she said. She changed her locks and she is upset about small things and now she is making it hard for family to visit. We are trying to be patient. The word confused flew like a paper bird and landed on a few shoulders. I watched it sit there and decided not to shoo it yet. One woman hummed the way people hum when they have no facts but still want to agree. Another tilted her head in that angle that says bless her heart without needing the words. Tiffany looked pleased with the way her story found chairs to sit in. Ms. Lorraine slipped to my side as quiet as a curtain, her hand light on my elbow. Do you hear the weather? She asked under her breath. I hear the forecast, I answered, and I lifted the folder just enough for her to see its spine. She smiled without showing teeth. The youth choir began to rehearse a song about light finding a window and the notes carried through the lobby like a clue sent ahead of the truth. I asked Pastor if he had a moment in his office. He did. His office smells like paper and patience. He closed the door behind us in a way that said privacy without saying hush. I set the folder on his desk and told him what I had heard in a backyard and what I had read in a bank and what I had found in a storage unit that did not know my name. I told him I did not plan to run a trial in the sanctuary. I told him I was not asking for applause or a side to be chosen or a jury to be formed. I asked him to hold a sealed copy of my trust packet in his safe that lives behind the picture of the Jordan River, to keep it unopened unless my successor trustee needed help finding breath after bad news. He nodded slow, then opened his top drawer and took out a book where he writes things that matter. He wrote my name and the date and the word sealed copy for safekeeping, and then placed the envelope in a tin box that already held keys and rings and 2 folded letters labeled to be read when I am gone. He prayed a small prayer, not for victory, for clarity and for dignity and for steady steps. When I left his office, the talk in the hallway had turned to choir robes and bake sale prices. Tiffany stood near the stairs that lead down to the fellowship hall, and a few people stood with her like driftwood caught by the same tide. She met my eye and smiled a smile that did not belong to Sunday. Claudia, we missed you at brunch last month, she said in a tone that wanted to sound generous. I said I was home making choices. The smile blinked then stayed. We went downstairs for coffee and sheet cake that tastes like birthdays and budgets. The fellowship hall is where everything that is almost said finds a place to finish its sentence. I poured coffee and Ms. Lorraine cut me a slice with a neat edge. Near the sinks, 2 ushers talked about the homecoming schedule, and who would be in the counting room, and who would steer the line at the donation table so no one felt pushed. At the long table by the serving window sat 3 women who can make or break a rumor by deciding whether it deserves a chair. One waved me over. They asked about my garden and my basil that had learned to reach for the window. Then the gentlest one asked if I was doing all right and made the question sound like a quilt rather than a probe. I told her I am doing the work that lets sleep arrive on time. She nodded the way grown women nod when they respect a sentence. Tiffany took a spot 2 chairs down and let a sigh find the room. She said it is such a burden when elders make things complicated. We just want harmony. The word harmony is a pretty dress that can hide a bruise. I let it hang there. I took a bite of cake and let the sugar tell my heart to calm down so the facts could speak. The twist began then, quiet and clean. Aaliyah came down the steps with 2 friends and she had the face of someone who has decided to speak her age with care. She kissed my cheek and asked if I needed anything from the store for the week. Tiffany called to her, honey, come taste this, and took her hand with a grip that looked like ownership. Aaliyah slipped free as if she had learned a new dance. I will in a minute, she said. And her eyes met mine with a small shine that said, I see you. The room noticed. Ms. Lorraine let out a sound that is half laugh and half amen. I placed my coffee cup down and stood. Not to lecture. To plant. I thanked the ladies for the cake and told them how homecoming always reminds me that truth does not fear a crowd, and that I was looking forward to a night where we celebrate what is good and remember what is right, and that I had brought a sealed packet for the pastor to hold because I am a woman who likes her business neat. The word neat did more work than a speech. It told the room that I am not lost. It told the room that my name keeps house. I did not say Tiffany. I did not say Andre. I did not say storage. I did not say bank. People heard all 4. The choir upstairs reached the line about "Let the light in," and the notes found a beam and rested there. On the way out of the hall, a deaconess touched my hand and said in a voice made of gravel and honey, "You keep doing what you are doing." Outside on the steps, the sun sat on the shoulders of men discussing lawnmowers and the price of gas. Children ran from shadow to shadow and turned the shadows into sails. Tiffany stood near the bottom of the rail waiting for someone to ask her for a story. When no one did, she straightened her purse strap and told the air, "We just want peace." "Peace is not a rug that hides dirt," Ms. Lorraine murmured, and I bit back a smile that wanted to be visible. I walked home slow with the folder secure and the church behind me singing the last hymn like a blessing that reaches the street. The day did not need a scene. It needed a seed. I had planted it. The ground felt ready. Homecoming night filled the fellowship hall and the sanctuary with a kind of bright hum that only happens when memory and hope agree to sit beside each other. The tables were dressed with white cloths and jars of tea lights flickered like small promises, and the air held the mixed scent of fried chicken from the kitchen and perfume and starch and old wood warmed by many seasons. People arrived the way they always do, in clusters held together by stories, and every so often a laugh rose and floated to the rafters where it softened and fell like light. The program said welcome, then choir, then testimonies, then offering, then a small word from Pastor Green. I took my place 3 rows from the front on the aisle where my knees could stand up without fuss. My folder lay flat on my lap beneath my hand, steady as a sleeping cat. Andre entered with Tiffany on his arm, and he wore the look of a man who believes he is being watched for good reasons, his smile wide, his nods generous, and Tiffany matched the step as if they had rehearsed, her dress the color of new coins, her hair set in a way that claimed a camera even when there was not one. They greeted people by name, and Tiffany leaned in with friendly words that sounded polished and just loud enough to be overheard. I heard we love our elders, and I heard family is everything, and I heard Claudia must be resting, bless her. The room absorbed the words as a room will when food is good and the music is soft and no one wants a draft. The choir began with a song that always makes the eyes of men shine without admitting to tears, and the tenors carried the line about light finding open windows. The ushers moved like water around stones, exact and kind. When it was time for testimonies, a few stood and spoke about the ways a hand had reached for them when the ground gave way, about a bill covered just in time, about a child who came home after a long drift. Each story set another chair at the table for gratitude. The offering followed with the measured shuffle of dollars and envelopes, and the clink of coins added by children who liked the sound. Then Pastor Green stepped forward and said he wanted to ask 2 people to share a word about the importance of honoring those who have built our roads. He said it would not be a debate, and it would not be a trial, and it would not be long. He looked at Andre and said, "Son, would you offer a few words about our duty to family?" Andre nodded and rose and walked to the front with a face that knew how to be agreeable. He spoke of respect and of tradition and of making sure no one is forgotten at holidays. He said the right phrases and the room offered the right sounds back. Tiffany folded her hands in front of her and smiled at him, as if he were delivering a sermon that had been drafted at their kitchen table. When he finished, he thanked Pastor and reached to sit back down. Then Pastor looked at me and said, "Mama Claudia, would you like to say a word?" The room turned to me in one motion that felt like wind changing direction. I stood with the help of my own 2 feet and carried my folder to the small lectern at the front. My hands did not shake. My voice did not rush. "Thank you, Pastor," I said, "and thank you all for loving a woman who has stood in your kitchens and in your pews for more years than I have fingers to count. Tonight I want to speak plainly about honor and about truth." I said, "Elders do not demand parades. We ask for chairs that do not wobble and for names that are spoken with care. And when a chair is kicked or a name is bent, it is not drama to straighten it." I told them that kindness without honesty is a ribbon on an empty box. I did not say the backyard. I did not say the sentence that tried to make me small. I told a shorter story, real and spare. I said sometimes when a door is left unlocked, people we love wander into places they should not and take things that do not belong to them. They do it in small handfuls and tell themselves it does not count because the jar still looks full. And then one day a woman finds that the jar is light and her history has been put away in a dim room, and she has to decide whether she will pretend not to see. I set the folder on the lectern and rested a hand on it like one rests a hand on a Bible. My plan had been to keep it closed and speak only of principles, to plant the idea that truth can stand without names. That changed when Tiffany stood up from the second row and cut her voice through the room like a ribbon being pulled tight. she said in a tone that belonged to any place but a sanctuary. Stop this, Claudia is confused, she is making scenes, she is not herself, we have been patient, we have tried to help, she is acting like a crazy grandma who wants attention. The word landed at my feet with the weight of an old chain. A hush rolled through the pews and then the hush deepened into the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but concentration. Pastor raised a hand to ask for calm. I did not look at Tiffany. I opened the folder. I held up a copy of a bank document with my name and a secondary card and said this is a form with a check mark by authorized beside a signature that is not mine. I held up a page of transactions and said this is a list of withdrawals that walk themselves through months the way a tired thief walks through a room, small steps, regular steps, always the same corridor. I held up a printed photograph of an urn and a ring and a doily inside a storage unit, and I said these are my sacred things stored in a place I never visited, while I was told everything was in its right place. I kept numbers and account details covered because the point was not to shame. The point was to speak. The room did not murmur. It listened the way people listen when a door they thought was locked swings open on its own. Tiffany laughed a sound without warmth and said, you are misunderstanding, we were keeping things safe, we were organizing because you are old and forgetful and it was temporary. Andre tugged at her sleeve and whispered, but the whisper only kept its manners for 1 second. She pulled free and said, this is what I mean, and she waved toward me like I was a lesson. Ms. Lorraine from the 4th row let out a soft sound, part sorrow, part no more. Pastor said, let us keep decency. I lifted my hand slightly and he nodded that I could continue. I said, I am not here to choose teams. I am here to say that honor has to touch the ground to be real. I said paper is patient but it does not lie, and keys are honest because they either fit or they do not. I told the room that I had changed the locks at my house and that I had changed the locks on my legacy, that a trust now holds the deed to my home while I live, and that when I rest the proceeds will go to the Greenway shelter that keeps women standing when the world wants them to fold. A few people murmured amen, not as a cheer but as an understanding that something exact had been chosen. Tiffany said, so you are cutting your own family out in public, and she smiled in a way that asked for outrage to come sit by her. I said, no, I am choosing what to keep and what to give, and I will not be asked to pretend that confusion is kindness. Andre looked at the carpet as if it could offer a road out. He tried to speak and then closed his mouth, and for a moment he looked like the boy who once told the truth about a broken window and cried because relief can be heavier than guilt. The ushers shifted their feet. The choir stood without singing, habit making them rise when the room holds a long note. Pastor Green stepped forward and placed one hand on the lectern, not to take the papers, to steady the moment. He said, this is a house of light and a house of care, and we will not use it to wound, but we will use it to tell the truth. He thanked me for my courage without calling it a battle. He asked the congregation to remember that elders are not props for anyone's story, and that legacy is a sacred choice. He asked us to pray for humility where pride had found a stage. He did not say names. He did not need to. The room breathed out together and then in together as if we were being taught again how to share air. I closed the folder and held it against my chest and stepped down from the lectern. People did not swarm me. They did not perform comfort. They simply made space as I passed, the way a crowd makes space when a person carries a sleeping child. On the 2nd row, Tiffany sat very still, her face set like a plate that has been dropped and glued back without care. Andre kept his eyes on his hands. As I reached my pew, a woman I know from the choir touched my elbow and said softly, we heard you. The offering was taken again, a quiet redo, and the baskets came back heavier, not for me, for the shelter someone had mentioned without asking for a penny. That was the twist I did not expect, and it pressed a sweet ache into my ribs. Pastor closed the night with a prayer that asked for clean hearts and steady steps, and for the wisdom to lock the doors that need locking and to open the doors that lead to mercy. When the benediction rose, the room felt lighter by a small degree, like a storm had agreed to pass over. On the steps outside, people talked in low voices that did not ask for gossip to lead. No one asked me for a speech. A few held my hand for a breath longer than usual and then let go. I walked home with my folder under my arm and the night air cool on my face. The town had watched the truth stand up in its shoes. I did not feel triumphant. I felt exact. Morning brought a quieter town and a louder conscience, not just mine but the kind that moves through a community when a room has watched truth stand up in its shoes. And in the days that followed, I saw how the price of betrayal is paid in small coins that never stop clinking. At the grocery store, two women who had practiced nodding at Tiffany for years found their necks stiff and their mouths busy with other subjects. And the cashier who likes to compliment earrings counted her change with a focus that did not need to find a face. And word reached me through the vine that the ladies who run the fellowship hall had moved Tiffany from the pie table to the broom closet rotation, which is not a punishment so much as a lesson that every room has work and some work asks you to be quiet and listen. Andre showed up at the barbershop and the men made room for him on the bench because men always make room. But the talk that used to carry him like a river paused and took a breath, and the barber asked about the weather and about football and about how a man should care for the ground his mother walks on, and Andre nodded until the nodding seemed to exhaust him. None of that was my doing, it was theirs, the town's, the way people say we heard, and we will conduct ourselves accordingly. And while some might call that cold, I have learned that sometimes distance is not ice, sometimes it is an invitation to thaw. The practical matters followed the moral ones with the same patience they had shown when they were ignored. Miss Patel called to say the signature comparison was under review and the secondary card had been closed with a final note, and that the storage unit fee had been blocked from automatic payment, and she asked if I would like the bank to flag any attempt to reopen the card as a new event requiring an in-person photo and a manager's sign-off, and I said yes and thank you, and I set the phone down with the care you give a glass that has just delivered good water. I called the storage office and arranged a time to return with documentation so I could retrieve what was mine with a list and a witness and a receipt that would carry my name without wobbling, and the manager said he would be present and that the camera had recorded comings and goings that might explain dates on my printouts, and I felt the deep sigh that comes when daylight moves into a room that has been shut too long. People did not ask me for details on porches or at pew ends because the church had already hosted a better conversation. One that said let the papers speak where they belong and let human mouths rest when they are tempted to pronounce themselves judges. I did not waste breath on speeches at mirrors. I cooked beans and rice and let the house smell like a poem about comfort. I watered the basil and turned the pot toward the sun. I wiped the table in slow circles because circles make me remember that patience has a shape. The first call from Aaliyah came on Tuesday after dinner. Her voice small but clear the way a bell sounds when someone has washed it. "Grandma, I am sorry I stayed quiet," she said. "I thought keeping peace meant keeping my mouth shut, even when my eyes were awake. And now I see that peace without truth is just a rug that makes people trip." I listened and I let the apology have its space. Then I said the sentence I had promised myself I would keep whenever Bridges wanted to lower too fast. "Only truth at my table, baby, not performances, not trying to make anyone look good on the outside while the inside grows mildew." She said, "I can do that, I want to do that." And then the relief in her breath floated through the line like a small white flag that had chosen the right wind. She asked if she could come by to bring a notebook for school and to sit with me in the kitchen, and I told her yes. And the yes did not feel like a weak spot, it felt like a door with a solid hinge. When she arrived the next afternoon, she carried a simple sketch she had made of a woman sitting at a small table with two keys on the wood and a window behind her that showed a strip of sky. And she said, "This is you as I see you now, not angry, just exact." And I felt my eyes warm the way glass warms in sun. We ate banana bread and drank tea, and she told me about friends who posted pictures that are not the full story and about teachers who love order because order gives children a taste of safety. And she asked if I would help her write a letter for a scholarship later in the year. And I told her I would do more than help. I would place a letter beside it written years in advance in a packet with my name on it and hers beside. And the look she gave me answered a question I had not had the courage to ask, the question of whether love can be repaired without denying what broke. Meanwhile, the town adjusted its manners around Tiffany and Andre, not with cruelty, with a seriousness that says we will not pretend we did not hear what we heard. A deaconess told me she had suggested a volunteers class on financial literacy for young couples and that Tiffany might benefit from sitting in the front row, and I did not smile, though something in me wanted to, because justice that teaches is better than justice that taunts. The climax of those days did not arrive in a scene. It arrived in a letter from the bank confirming the changes and listing the alerts that would now sing to my phone whenever a dollar tried to leave without saying please. And the letter read like a hymn where each stanza closes a door and opens a window. I placed the letter in the fireproof box with my trust packet, and I put copies in the envelope I would carry to pastor for safekeeping. Then I sat in the hush and counted 3 breaths and looked around my small kitchen and felt a rightness that did not need witnesses. I thought about calling Andre, and the thought walked to the boundary I had set and asked for permission, and the boundary said not yet. And I honored it because a boundary ignored becomes a rumor that you spread about yourself. That night I slept through until dawn, not because the world had turned kind, because my house had turned true. In the morning I wrote a short line in my notebook to keep the day honest. Prices were paid. Papers held. Love told the truth and was not punished for it. Then I closed the book and made coffee and let the kettle teach the room that patience can boil without boiling over. Mr. Carter called on a Thursday when the sky had that washed blue that makes roofs look taller, and he said our paperwork was clean and the market had smiled and an offer had arrived from an older couple who wanted quiet and who loved the slant of the front window. And he said they had no wish to bargain the dignity out of the price, and I told him that sounded like the right kind of buyers for a house that had learned its manners, so we set the closing for the following week and he brought the packet to my apartment where the light falls across the small table in a stripe that feels like a blessing. We read every page together and he pointed to the lines where the trust speaks in my voice and I signed with a slow hand that did not waver, and he slid the papers into a folder and said the title company would send confirmation by end of day. And I thanked him with the kind of thanks that comes from the marrow. When the email arrived it did not shout, it named the transfer to the trust, it named the sale at fair value, it named the deposit path to the account that now carries my instructions, and I sat a moment with my palms flat on the table feeling the wood say you did not rush and you did not stumble. Mr. Carter called back to ask if I wanted a check cut to the shelter now or if I preferred to wait, and the answer had been living in my chest for months. I want to give it now, I said, because legacy is not a rumor I plan to leave in a drawer. And he said then let us do it right. And the next morning I walked to the bank with the trust binder in my bag and the clerk printed a bank check with a decimal that carried decades inside it, and she folded it into a long envelope and slid it toward me, with a look that said she understood more than the numbers. The Greenway Women's Shelter sits on a street lined with sycamores that make shade deep enough to ease a summer afternoon. And the bell on the door gave a polite ring when I stepped inside with the envelope held like a small bird. The lobby smelled faintly of clean laundry and coffee, and a bulletin board held thank you notes written in pencil with hearts drawn by hands still learning steadiness. The director came out, a woman with kind eyes and shoes that said she does not waste steps. I told her my name and that I had something for the women who leave without shoes, and I placed the envelope in her hands. She opened it and looked at the number, and her breath caught and then released like a door unhitching from weather, and she said we will put this toward beds and locks and a van that starts every time. And I laughed softly at locks because that word has followed me like a faithful dog, and we stood together for a long second that felt like a page turning. She asked if I wished to attach a plaque or a room name and I said no thank you, keep the rooms quiet and warm. Let the thanks sit in the work. She reached for a receipt and I told her to write it to the trust and to address the copy to my post office box because a woman should not have important papers chasing her around town. And she smiled and said you have thought this through. And I said the thinking was the hardest part and I had done it until the thinking ended and the doing began. On the walk home I felt no trumpet inside me. I felt the small strong satisfaction of a seam pulled neat, of a button finding its hole. In my apartment the afternoon light leaned across the floor, and the kettle began its low song because tea is the way my house marks events that refuse to be loud. I set the old lock I had kept in a small ceramic bowl near the window, its dull metal holding the shape of days that no longer fit, and beside it I placed the new key on a hook below Frank's photo, the one where he is laughing with paint flecks on his forearm from the summer we insisted on making the porch right ourselves. The two objects talked to each other without making a sound. Old lock lesson. New key choice. I brewed tea and stood with the mug under my chin and I said out loud that I had not won anything. I had simply returned what was mine to its purpose and sent the rest where it could be turned into beds and locks and a van that starts every time. The twist of the day came quiet and bright. A text arrived from Pastor Green saying a member had pledged to match a portion of my gift because light invites more light, and I set the phone down and let that truth take a chair. I called Aaliyah and told her about the shelter and she asked if she could volunteer on Saturdays to read to the children. And I told her yes baby, take your gentle voice and your good eyes and let those rooms know that stories still belong to them. She asked if the house felt strange now that it belonged to other hands, and I said homes teach you not to clutch, they teach you to thank them and to go, and mine had taught me everything it could. I spent the evening making a modest soup and I ate it standing by the stove with the radio turned low to a station that plays jazz without insisting on applause, and I felt a fullness that did not seek witnesses. I gathered the closing confirmation, the receipt from the shelter, and the note from Pastor and I placed copies in my fireproof sleeve, one in the safe box bag, one for the packet I left with the pastor, because keeping proof is not about expecting trouble, it is about letting your future self take a day off. I cleaned the small table and placed on it only what belonged there, the basil plant that leans toward the window, the photograph of Frank propped in a wooden frame, the small dish that holds a single ring I still wear on Sundays. When night came, I opened the window just enough to let the air fold itself around the room, and I sat in the gentle dark. The town had watched me change the locks on a story that did not fit me any longer. The shelter would buy beds and a van that behaves even in cold mornings. Aaliyah would read to children whose tomorrows are being stitched while they sleep. I did not feel like a woman who had taken revenge. I felt like a woman who had chosen where the light should go. I whispered thank you to the house that had moved on, to the porch that once held us, to the man who taught me to fix a clock so it kept honest time, and to the keys that answered with a small click when I turned them before bed. The first quiet morning after the papers were settled, I carried my teapot to the small balcony and let the steam rise into the new day. The street below was already awake with the steady talk of tires on pavement, and a sparrow scolded the world from the railing as if it had been elected to keep time. And I set 2 cups on the little table because I knew Aaliyah would come after school with the drawing she promised. The basil plant leaned toward the window like a curious child, and the air held that gentle cool that makes you believe even late summer can learn new manners. I smoothed the tablecloth with my palm and felt the small weave catch the skin at my fingertips, a reminder that fabric, like a life, is strongest where the threads cross and hold. When the knock came, it sounded like a memory choosing to behave. Aaliyah stepped in with a rolled sketch under her arm, and the glow that children carry when they know they have brought something that matters. She kissed my cheek and the powder of her face brush lifted like a sigh. We unrolled the drawing together, and there I was as she saw me, a woman seated at a table by a window, 2 keys resting beside a cup, her eyes set forward the way a person looks when she has found her balance. The lines were sure, not stiff, and the pencil had found a kind light along the cheek and the hands. I felt my heart rise once and then settle as if the room had quietly put a hand on my back. We hung the drawing where the wall meets the taller window so the afternoon sun could visit it without scolding, and I held the frame while Aaliyah turned the small screw, and in that simple teamwork a fresh piece arrived. She said it feels like the picture already lived here and was only waiting to be claimed. I told her some truths arrive exactly that way. They wait in the room until you are brave enough to speak to them. She asked if I had eaten, and I said not yet because tea wanted to be first, and we took our cups to the balcony where the city moved past us without asking for more than our presence. We sat without hurry. She told me about a book she was reading for English, the kind where a girl learns to tell her own story even when other people keep handing her scripts, and I told her I knew that girl and that she appears in different dresses at every age. We let the cups warm our hands. A neighbor 2 doors down watered a plant, and the steady stream of water made a sound like soft applause. Aaliyah asked if I had room for a bicycle on the balcony because her grandfather's old bike had followed her home. Both tires low, a loose chain, and a seat that wobbled, and she wanted a place to fix it with me because every town has roads that ride easier when someone who loves you holds the wrench. Bring it, I said, and later that afternoon the 2 of us stood with rags and a small bottle of oil and a hand pump and the patience a chain requires. Grease made a crescent moon on my thumb and a thin black line on her wrist, and when the gears finally caught and the back wheel trembled into a clean spin, she laughed the laugh of a child who finds a song she thought she had lost. We fitted a cheap new bell to the handlebar, and its clear note rang once into the courtyard and then folded itself away. After we washed our hands, I cut 2 slices of banana bread because ritual keeps a house steady, and we sat again at the little table and breathed under the easy shade. I asked her a question the way I ask my listeners when I record these stories at night with the lamp low. Tell me where you are listening from inside yourself today, I said, and she looked at the drawing and then at the keys and then at me, and she said, I am listening from the place that no longer needs to guess what you want from me. I am just going to bring truth and see if it is enough. It is enough, I said, and I meant it like a promise. She told me Tiffany had talked loud in a hallway at school pickup about elders who make trouble, that some friends had looked at the floor, and that she had kept walking because doing the next right thing does not require a crowd to clap. We let that settle. Then she said she wanted to volunteer at the shelter on Saturdays to read to children who are learning that home can be rebuilt. And the way she said it made me feel a soft ache that tasted like hope. We opened my small closet and found Frank's old tool tin and cleaned it of dust, and I told her how he taught me to fix the kitchen clock after it started losing minutes, how he said time deserves to be treated like a friend who waits at the corner even when you forget the meeting. We stood a moment before his photo where the new key now hangs beneath, the metal catching a stripe of light. Later, as the sun moved toward the building across the way and turned the window glass into slow fire, We started a simple stew for dinner and let the apartment fill with onions turning sweet and chicken finding tenderness. We ate with our bowls on the balcony railing, elbows careful, and we looked at the sky pretending its pinks were as new as we felt. She asked if she could keep a small notebook in my drawer for scholarship ideas, and I said yes, and I added a blank envelope addressed to the future because sometimes a girl needs to see a door with her name on it, even before she knows which hand will turn the knob. When she left, I walked her to the elevator with the bicycle rolling beside us, the new bell quiet out of respect for the hour, and at the door she hugged me with a fullness that let me feel both the child and the young woman. After she was gone, the apartment did not collapse into loneliness. It widened. I washed the 2 cups and set them to dry, and I wiped the table in a slow circle that seemed to draw a small harbor for tomorrow. The radio found a station that plays soft jazz and the saxophone stepped lightly across the room. I stood at the window and looked at the drawing on the wall. The woman in the chair looked back at me. She did not ask to be explained. She only asked to be lived. I turned to the listeners in my heart and asked the simplest question. Where are you listening from tonight? From a kitchen where the clock keeps honest time. From a porch that finally belongs to your name. From a quiet room that smells like tea and new pencil. Wherever you are, may peace sound like this. The letter arrived on a quiet Wednesday, folded into a plain envelope with my name written in Andre's careful print, the kind he used in 4th grade when he wanted the teacher to see he was trying, and I held it a moment at the table as if paper could speak before it was opened. Then I slid a butter knife under the flap and eased the page free. His words were not long and they did not wear perfume. He wrote that he had said things and laughed at things he did not have the courage to stop, that he had let convenience tell him who he was, that he was ashamed of the storage unit and ashamed that a card in my name could be used like a secret door, that he did not know how to be the man I deserved and feared it might be too late to learn. He wrote that Aaliyah had started to talk about me every day and she sounded changed, braver, and that her new voice made him hear how small his had been. He did not ask for forgiveness like a prize. He asked for the chance to try without promises he could not keep. I read the letter once and then again, and the second time I listened for the old tricks that try to slip into apology like shadows following a person home. I did not hear them. I heard fatigue and something that might be truth if it was fed and not flattered. I folded the page along its crease and set it in the middle of the table. I poured tea and did not touch the letter while the steam made a soft fog between us. Forgiveness is a door with a lock inside. I hold the key. The sentence moved across my thoughts like a small boat crossing steady water. I knew that answering too fast would only perform a reunion for an audience that did not need to be invited. I knew that silence could be medicine when the body of a family is learning to breathe without lying. I took the letter to my desk and opened the shallow drawer labeled History, the place where I keep photos that remind me of what was real and programs from funerals that insist on being remembered, and a receipt from a Christmas where someone I loved used their last cash to buy me a scarf. I placed the letter under the photo of Frank fixing the clock with a grin he did not apologize for, and I closed the drawer with the pressure of one finger. Not refusal. Not forgetting. Placed to rest. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah came by with her notebook and a pencil stuck behind her ear like a bright idea trying to stay close, and after we made tea with honey because her throat felt tired, she asked if anything had come in the mail, not nosy, curious the way a person learns to be when truth becomes a table rule. I told her a letter had arrived from her father, and that I had read it and set it to rest. She asked if I was going to write back and I said not yet, and maybe not with ink, maybe with behavior, because sometimes a letter should be answered by months of quiet proof. She nodded and then she asked the question I have been waiting to hear. What does forgiveness mean when money and respect met each other at the door, and did not like what they saw? I said it means we do not pretend money and respect live in different houses. It means every dollar is a sentence and we read it out loud before it leaves. It means no access without permission, no permission without clarity, and no clarity without the kind of love that does not spend other people like spare change. She wrote that down as if it were school, then looked up and said, I think I used to think forgiveness was the same as being quiet. Now I think it is the same as being precise. I laughed softly because a young woman who finds the word precise has already saved herself from many rooms. We took out the trust packet and I showed her the places where her name appears just enough to open a gate without inviting a crowd, keepsakes that teach, a year of books paid to the school, and she touched the paper the way a person touches an anchor. Then I told her that boundaries are not fences that lock love out. They are measuring tapes that allow you to build a room where love can stand up straight. She asked what that means for her father, and I said it means the same as it does for me. Only truth at my table. He can come to the door with honesty and steady steps. He cannot come with a pocket full of noise. She breathed out, then in, and nodded. I could see her setting a hinge on a door inside her own chest. The twist came that evening when the phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize, and the voice that answered my hello was Tiffany's. Calm in the first second and then sharp when she said, "Aaliyah has been different since you started this drama, and I need you to tell her to come home when I say and to stop making our business public." I said our business got public when my ring went into a storage unit, and when a word meant to shame me found air at a church table. I said Aaliyah is growing her own spine, and that is not my work, it is hers. And you will not talk to me as if I am a problem you are trying to manage. The line went very quiet and then clicked off. I set the phone down and realized my hands were steady. There was no triumph in me, only a clear space where fear used to sit. That night I stood by the window and watched a thin moon climb the building opposite, and I told Frank out loud that I was doing my best to keep our promises to time, to truth, to the girl with the notebook, and to the woman in the drawing who asks to be lived. Before bed I wrote a short line in my journal. Mercy without amnesia. Dignity without delay. In the morning I made oatmeal and added a handful of raisins because sweetness is a decision, not an accident. And after I washed the spoon I opened the history drawer and touched the folded letter like a blessing you do not rush. I did not feel finished with this chapter, and I did not need to be. Some doors you do not slam or swing wide. You simply keep the key where it belongs and you wait for a knock that sounds like work. I woke on my birthday without an alarm, and the light in the apartment carried that early hush that makes rooms feel bigger. I brewed tea in the blue cup and watched steam write a small prayer above the kettle. The basil by the window had grown taller and leaned toward the sun with a confidence I decided to borrow. And on the table the photo of Frank kept his good laugh ready like a song he never forgot. I set out 2 plates because Miss Lorraine had promised to come by with a slice of sweet potato pie and a story she had saved for a day that needed sweetness. The clock that Frank fixed ticked with the honest patience that taught me more about time than any calendar ever has. And I let it set the pace for what came next. Aaliyah arrived with tulips wrapped in brown paper and a notebook tucked under her arm. She kissed my cheek and called me birthday lady in a voice that made the room feel soft. We set the flowers in a jar by the drawing she made. The woman in the chair with the 2 keys on the table. And the line seemed to glow in the morning, a quiet testimony to what a spine looks like when it has learned to stand for itself. Then Ms. Lorraine knocked with her elbow because her hands were full and the pie smelled like holidays done right, and we sat together with tea and pie and the kind of talk that lands without gossip. She told a story about a bus driver who waited while she searched her purse and how gratitude is a coin best spent immediately. And I told them about the shelter buying a van that starts every time and about a pledge from a member who wanted to match a piece of what I had given, and the 3 of us let that light sit between us like a candle that does not burn down. In the afternoon the church ladies called to sing a short song over the phone, a chorus of Yes Lord and Keep Her. And when we hung up pastor sent a simple text, honor stays after the flowers go. And I placed the phone face down and sat very still because the sentence was a gift that did not need ribbon. I looked at the old lock in the small bowl and the new key hanging under Frank's photo, and I understood at last that both belonged to my story. The lock is lesson, the key is choice. One tells me why I will never again leave my name unaired. The other tells me how I will open what deserves me and close what does not. Toward evening I walked the tulips to the balcony and the city offered up its small orchestra, a radio 3 floors down, a child learning to jump rope, a window shutting without anger. I thought about Andrea's letter resting in the history drawer and I did not feel pulled to take it out. Mercy without amnesia remained the rule. The door in my chest stayed unlocked from the inside. A boundary and a kindness at once, and it was enough. The phone buzzed with a message from Aaliyah saying she had signed up for Saturday reading at the shelter and could she borrow a sweater if the morning was cool. I wrote back yes and take the one that makes you feel most yourself. Then I turned off the ring and let the quiet come full. At dusk my 3 friends from choir stopped by with paper cups and gentle perfume and we stood by the window and watched the street change colors. We did not speak of scandal or storage or bank forms. We spoke of greens and grocery sales and page 2 of the hymn book where the harmony lives. And when they left they hugged with both arms and told me to keep the kettle ready. I washed the cups, wiped the table, and placed on it only what belongs, the drawing, the tulips, the bowl with the old lock. My cup, the clock kept its promise and never scolded. And I felt a soft swell in my chest that was not triumph and not exhaustion. It was steadiness. The kind that lets a woman walk past a mirror without needing permission. I sat with my journal and wrote a single line to mark what the year had taught. They called me crazy. I answered with keys and with truth. Then I closed the book and did not lock it away. I left it open on the table because some stories guard themselves simply by being clear. I turned the new key in the front door and listened to the clean click that has become my benediction. The apartment breathed the way a room breathes when it trusts its keeper. I looked at the ceiling and spoke to the listeners in my heart. If you are hearing this from a kitchen where the clock finally tells the time and where your name finally belongs to you, I am glad we arrived together. If you are hearing this from a porch that used to be a stage for other people and is now a chair with your own cushion, I am glad you stayed. If you are hearing this from a quiet room that smells like tea and pencil shavings and plans, I am glad you tuned your life toward light. Tell me where you are listening from and if this story met you on your own road. Leave a word and come back for the next chapter. Honesty travels better with company. And tomorrow I will wake, water the basil, and live what I have written.